Okay, guys, today we're going to be looking at the age of Napoleon. We just finished up talking about the French Revolution and all the events that happened during that. And now this is going to lead to the rise of Napoleon. And of course, we have mentioned a little bit about the Directory and how he overthrows it, but we're going to get into a little more details about Napoleon and his rule as he creates a French empire. So let's move on and let's look at what our standard is. Our standard is to discuss how nationalism spread across Europe with Napoleon, but was repressed for a generation under the Congress of Vienna and the Concert of Europe until the revolutions of 1848. So we're going to eventually get into the Congress of Vienna and Concert of Europe and a little bit about the revolutions of 1848, but this is the standard that we're going to be addressing. The objective of this lesson is you'll be able to explain Napoleon's rise to power, his outcome, and the lingering effects that he's going to have on Europe. And you're also going to be able to discuss a little bit about Napoleon's legacy. Now, again, Napoleon's rise begins really sort of after the death of Robespierre because you get a new government that's going to be put in charge of France. It's going to be the Directory. Again, the Directory was made up of a five-man group and it had a two-house legislature. Remember the Council of 500 and the Council of Elders. This was created by a new constitution, the Constitution of 1795, which created this two-house legislature. But the problem was that the Directory was corrupt. They were taking bribes and they appointed people to governmental positions, even though they weren't necessarily qualified. Because of this, Napoleon feels like he needs to step in. He has been a general fighting in the wars during the French Revolution against some of the other European countries. And so he will overthrow the Directory in 1799 in what we call a coup d'etat. Again, Napoleon starts off as a lieutenant in the French army. He's going to help win a series of victories during the French Revolution. Um, he actually even tried to conquer Egypt um, right before he overthrows the Directory, but he's going to fail in his attempt to take over Egypt and try to hurt Britain. Of course, Britain, was fighting against the French during this period. In 1799, like we just mentioned, he would overthrow the Directory and he's going to set up a new government. This new government is going to be a three-man governing body known as the consulate. And he is going to name himself the first consul in the consulate. And that happens in 1799. And in 1801, he is going to appoint himself consul for life. And if you know a little bit about world history, you should know this is a direct throwback to the Roman Empire, and of course, this is sort of what they had in place. And consuls were the guys that were in charge, and then eventually Julius Caesar takes over, and he is going to name himself as consul for life as well, which basically means he becomes the first dictator for the Roman Empire. Napoleon's going to pretty much follow the same track, and in 1801 he names himself consul for life. In 1803, going sort of tying this in with U.S. history, Napoleon is going to sell the middle portion of the United States, which will come to be known as the Louisiana Purchase. He sells it to Thomas Jefferson, and of course, this is the whole midsection of the U.S. The reason why Napoleon sells that land was to get money to support his wars in Europe that he was fighting, and he needed the money, so he didn't think that having colonies was a big deal, and therefore he gets rid of his colonies in America. In 1804, Napoleon would name himself the Emperor of France and create the first French Empire, and he's going to crown himself Emperor Napoleon I. And here's a picture. You can see it's a callback once again to the Roman Empire and Augustus Caesar. If you know about that, you can see how Napoleon has himself dressed in this picture, and you can tell how he's trying to sort of make that connection. Remember, too, that Napoleon was from the island of Corsica, which is just off the coast of Italy, so he probably has a lot of recollections of the things in Italy. Of course, Rome is in Italy, and the Roman Empire existed in Italy, so therefore Napoleon really admires the Romans. Napoleon's going to start by reforming France. He's going to do it in a couple of different ways. He's going to do it economically, politically, and socially. His economic reforms were to control prices. Remember, they were having bad financial situations during the time of the Revolution and during the time of the Directory. So he's going to try to control prices. He's going to improve the infrastructure, which means he's going to start to build roads and canals in France. And he's going to try to set up new industry. And this is sort of when the Industrial Revolution is sort of beginning in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So he's going to try to bring France into that. His political reforms would have been that he was going to try to get away from what the Directory had done and what Robespierre had done. He's going to open up jobs to men of talent, meaning you had to be qualified in order to hold a job. Remember, we just talked about how the Directory wasn't doing that. They were actually putting people in positions that weren't necessarily qualified, and they were doing it as favors. The Napoleonic Code was set up. This was a set of laws that had enlightened principles within them. And of course, it's going to play a major role for Napoleon as well. Social and religious reforms would include that he would make peace with the Catholic Church during Robespierre's reign. Uh, Robespierre tried to isolate the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is going to sort of be shunned for a little while. Once Napoleon comes back, he's trying to make an alliance with the Catholic Church. He knows he needs the church to be able to maintain power. The only bad thing about all of this is that women are going to lose a lot of rights during this period. Of course, they didn't have a lot to begin with, but the ones that they did have, they're going to start to lose them during the period of Napoleon's reign. Napoleon begins to build his new empire between 1804 and 1812 as he begins to march across Europe. Here's a good representation of all of the land. Of course, all of this you see in blue is the land that he's going to conquer. He's going to annex the Netherlands, Belgium, parts of Italy, and Germany. So he's going to create this huge empire, eventually into Spain, and of course Norway, and even into parts of Germany as well. He's going to create a new system of economic warfare because Britain is his main enemy at this point, his nemesis. And one way he's going to try to strike back at Britain, because he knows he doesn't have a navy, he's not going to be able to invade Britain. So he's going to try to hurt Britain economically by not allowing any of these countries in Europe that he's got control over to actually trade with Britain. And he's hoping that would hurt Britain. But as we all know, Britain has a ton of colonies during the 1800s. And so even though they maybe couldn't trade with some of these European countries, they were still trading with everyone else. And they still had a large navy, and they still had all these ships to move goods and products. So the continental system really didn't work. But again, what was the continental system? Just to reiterate this, the continental system would not allow countries within the French Empire to trade with Britain. And the whole purpose of it was to try to hurt Britain economically and help Napoleon eventually, hopefully, maybe defeat Britain. Napoleon's empire is going to face some challenges. A couple of these challenges included the idea of nationalism. Of course, nationalism, again, pride in one's country. Some of this began to work against Napoleon. He tried to make everybody into French citizens, and some people just didn't want that. Some of these countries he conquered didn't view themselves as being part of the French Empire. And one of the countries that did this were the Spanish. They actually waged guerrilla warfare against Napoleon. Guerrilla warfare is just basically where you do these hit and run raids against the armies. And so, again, Nationalism wasn't necessarily accepted by all these countries that Napoleon had conquered. And of course, when Hitler does that too, it's going to be a problem for him. But Napoleon, again, nationalism works against him because a lot of these countries are going to view him as a foreign oppressor. He's not one of them. Napoleon's also going to make a critical mistake by invading Russia. He's going to march into Russia, driving the Russians back. Little does he know that the Russians are pretty much setting a trap for Napoleon, allowing him to get further and further and further into Russia. And Russia's a very big country, if you didn't know that. And as they are retreating back towards Moscow, they're going to start to burn everything and torch everything and destroy everything because they know that Napoleon's army is feeding off of the land. And once they do this by burning their crops and villages, it's going to leave the French with a little bit of food. In fact, there was a lot of starvation. Napoleon's going to lose thousands of men during this campaign into Russia, and it's going to weaken the French army. Eventually, what's going to get the French is going to be the Russian winter because they got too far into Russia, and the winter sets in, and Napoleon is sort of stuck there in Russia, and eventually he's forced to retreat. But the Russian winter is really what's going to get the French army during this campaign. As Napoleon retreated out of Russia, he's going to end up having to face a coalition army. A coalition is a group of different armies from different countries that are going to fight Napoleon at Leipzig. Leipzig's actually in Germany in 1813. This is often referred to as the Battle of Nations. And this coalition army is going to win. And once they win, Napoleon is going to be exiled to the island of Elba off of the Italian coast. And like we said earlier, remember Napoleon is from Corsica, which is right off the coast of Italy. So he's familiar with that area, and it's going to eventually help him out. Napoleon would abdicate his throne in the year of 1814. But Napoleon's going to make one more attempt to try to come back, and he does in 1815. He escapes from Elba. He comes back to France. He's greeted by his soldiers, and the soldiers take him in, even though most people were thinking they would probably turn on him, but they didn't. They joined in with him when he arrives back in France in 1815. He would have one more major battle. That battle would be the Battle of Waterloo. Again, an alliance or coalition army of European powers would defeat Napoleon. And then Napoleon, this time, instead of sending him close by, they're going to send him off to St. Helena, which is an island in the middle of the Atlantic, where they hoped that Napoleon wouldn't escape and ever return. Shortly after his arrival at St. Helena, Napoleon's going to mysteriously die, and some people have all these conspiracy theories about it, but Napoleon would spend his last days on the island of St. Helena in the middle of the Atlantic. After Napoleon has been defeated, now the question becomes, how are they going to put Europe back together? Remember, he has conquered all these countries. And remember the whole thing with the French Revolution and overthrowing the kings, and how the kings are going to fight back to try to regain their throne. And this has gone on for a while, but now Napoleon is gone, and all these countries that he has conquered have got to put themselves back together again. And so the Congress of Vienna would meet. Vienna is in Austria, if you didn't know that. These leaders of Europe are going to sit down and decide to put the conquered countries back the way they were, and they were going to put the kings back on the throne. So they're going to put the monarchs back in power. The goal was to try to create a balance of power to ensure peace, and they thought the best way to do that was to return it the way it was. But that's not really going to work either. The leader of the Congress of Vienna was a guy that was the leader of Austria, Metternich, which I've got listed here. He would lead most of these discussions, and he's going to be the one who's sort of going to be pushing to return the monarchs back to power. They decided on creating something known as the Concert of Europe, and this is sort of like a precursor to the United Nations and the League of Nations, where these countries would actually get together, and they would meet occasionally to discuss these problems that they were having before they got out of hand, which they knew they didn't address them during the time of the French Revolution and during the time of Napoleon. And so, therefore, they decided it would be a good idea to meet and discuss those problems. So that's what the Concert of Europe was. Okay, now I've got a couple of questions here. Again, I want you to write these questions down, and then I'd like for you to answer them based on the notes that we just went over. So again, write these down. Put these in your put these on your note sheet, and you can answer them using these notes. Again, if you can answer all these questions, you're in really, really good shape. Maybe you don't even have to refer back to these notes, but these are the main things that you should have gotten from the notes. Okay, that's going to do it. Again, make sure you have these questions done. Check your notes out when you're done. Please bring those to me. Let me check them off on your note sheet, and we'll make sure that we get you going. We are headed for a test or quiz, really a quiz, later on in the week, so you can be prepared for that. Okay, I'll catch you guys on the next one.